Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Hear Me Out is a new theatre podcast produced and presented by Lucy Eaton, who has recently been thrust into the international limelight as both the real and on-screen sister of Simon Evans, creator of the smash hit BBC lockdown comedy Staged, starring David Tennant and Michael Sheen. Hear Me Out features interviews with leading theatre actors in which they discuss and then perform a speech from a play in which they have appeared, which holds particularly strong memories for them. The first 4 episodes are now available, featuring Claire Skinner on Harold Pinter's Moonlight, Adrian Lester on Cost of Living by Martyna Majok, Denise Gough on People, Places and Things by Duncan Macmillan, and Mark Bonnar on Shakespeare's Hamlet. I asked Lucy, just before the series was officially announced, to explain what the podcast is all about.
Hear Me Out is basically a show for theatre lovers and people who are interested in actors and how they approach stuff, what they respect, what they find challenging, what they love to watch, as well as what they love to be in. I keep sort of saying to people that it's a bit like the theatre version of Desert Island Discs. And what I mean by that is just that I love how in Desert Island Discs, they use the songs as a springboard to have a really great conversation about their lives and just what they love, what they stand for, you know, what challenges they've faced. And it's a sort of similar thing. I ask all of my guests, what is your favourite speech? And then we sort of delve into this piece of writing that for whatever reason they think is incredible or memorable or just has really played an important part in their life in some way. And then we just use that, as a springboard to chat about other theatre that they love or incredible memories they've got of shows they've done, things they found hard and everything in between.
A few theatrical anecdotes as well.
A few theatrical anecdotes, absolutely. So that's sort of the premise of the show. And then I let the conversation just go wherever it wants to go.
That's there are so many of these types of podcasts which are just interviews, like this one. Mm-mm. But that's the unique point. It actually focuses around a particular speech, and it's generally one that they've actually in a play that they've been in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really good point. I think part of my desire to make the show came from the fact that I was missing rehearsals. I was missing making plays, and I was missing the kind of conversations you have during a rehearsal, whether in the rehearsals sat around a table or having a cup of tea over a morning break. So that was part of it. But the other part was that I do academic tutoring on the side of my acting and producing. And I've naturally been doing a lot more of it during lockdown because that's one industry that has not diminished. And with a lot of these kids that I was tutoring, I was doing a lot of A-level stuff, actually, and we were delving into Hamlet, which I've done a lot with kids in the past. But then one kid I was working with was doing Richard III, and I actually don't know Richard III that well. So I was sort of learning it by doing it with him. And then I was looking at Streetcar Named Desire as another incredible classic that I actually don't know that well. And I was diving into that with another child. And it just made me go, God, I'm a real geek. I'm a real sucker for literary analysis as well. Yeah. And I did English at university, and I really love getting to know new texts and looking at old ones that I thought I knew and getting to know them even better. So that was the other factor, I think, when I was making it that made what you very kindly said was the sort of unique sort of aspect of it. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Was that I thought, I want to get to grips with a text, like a specific text. I want to hear these actors talk about it. And I actually say in the very first episode, which is Claire Skinner's episode, when I was explaining it to her, I said that I always think as an actor, we are the most privileged in a performance. And what I mean by that is, particularly I think with older texts, maybe Shakespeare and stuff like that, we in the process of rehearsing have made sure that we understand everything. Or even if we don't understand it, we've discussed it in minute detail, before making a decision. And it means that sometimes I've been in rehearsal rooms. I remember the first show I ever did out of drama school was The Duchess of Malfi at the Old Vic. And I remember sitting there and watching Eve Best, coming to these decisions with Jamie Lloyd and Mark Bonnar playing out this speech, or Finbar Lynch, like the most Harry Lloyd. They were the most amazing actors. And I loved watching them have these discussions where they sussed out how to play stuff or what it meant, changing their mind, doing something and then actually changing their mind, doing a different thing. And I thought, an audience actually never gets that side. They just see the final product, and hopefully the final product is incredible, and it produces a wonderful emotional reaction, and it's escapist, and it's all of that. But actually, you won't get everything as an audience member. You can't, because the play will move at pace, and certain bits will land, other bits won't. You know, that's just totally natural. Whereas as an actor, when you're in it, or, you know, even if you're just standing in the wings, you hear every line, and there's a story behind every line because you've heard it being rehearsed, and so that was it as well. I thought I'd love to chat to some actors about speeches that mean something to them and hear those sort of, you know, like you said, some theatrical anecdotes, those anecdotes or those little tales or bits that they found really hard, bits that they really loved. I feel a little bit like after I'd edited a few episodes, I was like, oh God, I feel like a broken record. In every episode, at some point, I ask them what their favourite part of the speech is. And I thought, oh God, I don't want to sound like I don't have any better questions to ask, but it's something I am desperate to know. You know, every time they're talking, at some point in the episode, I just want to go, come on, is there a line that you're like, every time you say it, you just, you know, you get tingles.
Yeah.
So that was sort of that was where the whole premise, that was a very long-winded way of saying where the idea for the speech came from.
Well, no, I know exactly what you mean, because I mean, I taught things that I didn't necessarily know before I started teaching it, and it's a similar process going through it with students as going. I love that process in a rehearsal room, even if it's a script I've written myself, where you go deeper into it and you find things in it that you didn't know were there, and like you said, the audience, they just see it once. But I mean, who better to go through than, you know, great actors like Claire Skinner and Adrian Lester, you know?
Just amazing. I mean, these are the kind of people who, like, all they have to do, you know, the old adage of, like, they could just read the phone book. These are all people who, they just have to say, like, hello. And I'm like, that's the episode. The episode is over. Like, it's just, they're such incredible, sort of charismatic, fascinating.
You could hear it in your voice when you were talking to Adrian Lester, when you were talking about hustle.
Oh my God. Adrian, I mean, because I've sort of known Adrian for a few years now. We've never done a whole show together, but we've done a couple of different rehearsed readings together. And then obviously he was in stage over lockdown, but I've never told him how much I loved Hustle. And I thought early on, I was like, I'm going to break this. I'm going to drop this bombshell on him that I'm basically a hardcore Mickey Stone fan. Yeah. Oh, I love Adrian Lester. I just think he's such a remarkable actor and just such an all-round nice guy.
Yeah, and so versatile as well. I mean, what I remember him from,
versatile.
Probably before your time, is in Company at the Donmar Warehouse in 1996 when he played Bob.
I wish I had seen
phenomenal.
that. Yeah. Isn't that what he won the Olivier for? I think he won an Olivier for that.
It was recorded for TV.
Was it?
I don't know what happened. I remember recording it on TV and lending it to somebody and never getting it back. But there is a recording of it somewhere, a TV recording on the BBC.
Well, that's the thing. I think people forget that he can do musicals as well.
Yeah.
Like, didn't he do Guys and Dolls recently at the Royal Albert Hall?
Yeah.
And everyone was a bit like, Adrian Lester doing Guys and Dolls? And it's like, well, yes, he's won an Olivier for Best Musical. Like, he's definitely got the skills.
Yeah.
But honestly, that is just all the guests. I think most of them are people that I do know in some way. And that was quite a concerted decision because I knew that I wanted the chats to feel comfortable and informal. And I wanted these actors to share, you know, I'm not saying like secrets, but I wanted them to share like intimacies about these memories and these scripts. So I sort of early on thought, if I'm going to do this, actually, I'm just going to go to people I've already got a relationship with first. But then Denise Gough coming on it sort of happened by chance. Like, I know she's got a few things coming out at the moment, and actually her team sort of said, you know, we'd love her to come on it. She's gay, she'd love to come on it. And that was actually, you know, it was all I could do not to just fangirl all over the floor because I'm, you know, prior to recording the episode with her, I've never met Denise. I've just seen her being jaw-droppingly brilliant in People, Places and Things. Yeah. So also when she turned around and said, yeah, actually, I do want to discuss the acting and addiction speech in People, Places and Things, I was like, oh my God, like the privilege I have to get to just have a one-on-one chat with Denise Gough about like the show that 99% of the world, you know, associate her with.
Yeah. And
that she clearly has such an incredible connection with. It's obviously meant an enormous amount to her.
Well, it's fascinating the background that she gave to it as well about the addiction clinic and
yes,
and the way it resonated with those audiences when they came to see it as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's background that you can't get just from studying a script, isn't it?
No, exactly. Yeah, you're so right. And I remember, I think I might have cut this from the episode because I ended up just chatting so long with most of these actors. I had to cut some of it out. But I found that really resonated with me because one of the last show I did before all of this lockdown was A Day in the Death of Joe Egg at the Trafalgar Studios.
With Claire Skinner.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's how I know Claire and Patricia, who comes on the show later as well. And that's obviously about a couple who have a severely disabled daughter. And we had a similar thing where I know that Claire and Toby and Storm, who was playing the daughter, they met with a lot of parents who had children suffering from similar conditions. And we didn't all take part in those meetings, I think, out of just sort of a sense of respect and just trying to do it in a respectful manner. Yeah. It was just those three who met with them. But they all said, God, it made such an impact on them just actually speaking to people who were living the reality of this show. And then they came one night. It was just like Denise said, basically, about the addicts and people, places and things. They came one night and we did a little Q&A, I think, afterwards. And they were all just so grateful for the way in which it had been portrayed so honestly. And that absolutely, I can totally speak to what Denise was saying. That gives you more validation than any, 5-star review or anything, because you're like, that's so good to know that we've done, we've obviously made a group of people who go through something incredibly difficult feel a bit more seen and, have their stories told. So, yeah, when she told that anecdote, I was like, God, I can totally relate. But also, I just loved having her. I mean, I'm giving it all away now. Like, I hope your listeners still listen to the episode. But I found it amazing hearing about her. She talks a lot about the accolades, right? And the media attention and the industry attention following people, places and things. And I remember at the time seeing all that stuff as well. And I heard the stories of Denise Gough was apparently going to give up. She was going to give up acting just before she landed this role. And it became one of those, not urban legends, because it sort of is true, but these like anecdotes that are passed around and whispered in bar, corners. It's like, oh, she was going to give up. And it made it sound as if she was at the bottom and then she landed this thing and now she's at the top. And when she talks about it, she's like, no, I was at the bottom a while before I got it. And I pulled myself up. I decided I didn't care anymore. I decided I wasn't worth it. She says something lovely like, I met myself on the darkest night of the soul and I decided, you know what, you're all right. And so actually the way she talks about it, she goes, when I got it, it was funny. She says at one point, she's like, I'd learnt not to care. I really sort of released myself from that, which meant I could just enjoy the job. And it didn't matter. And then when actually the world suddenly started paying attention, it was all kind of funny. It was lovely, obviously, but I wasn't putting all this pressure. So I found that fascinating. It was so good to hear her direct experience of that.
It sounds like something that probably most actors have gone through at some point.
100%. Yeah. I think I started producing about 7 years ago now. And that was a bit of a turning point for me. It was hardly a people, places and things moment. But I definitely had that moment there where the producing made me go, oh, right, like this makes me walk with my head held high in a way that I wasn't actually as an actor. Because as an actor, you really are treated as the lowest of the low most of the time, just because you're so dispensable. There's so many of us. So unless you are the hottest thing right now, it's a really tough role to inhabit, actually. Yeah. And as soon as I started producing, even when all I was producing was tiny stuff, we were getting together and reading plays. We were maybe considering, putting something on for 1 week in a tiny little venue somewhere in Waterloo under one of the tunnels, Even when we were just at that stage, I felt such pride in myself because, I was creating. I was choosing to make stuff. And sort of I didn't care about. And I remember having an audition for the RSC, and it was my first audition for the RSC amidst all of that. And for the first time going into an audition and going, I don't actually know how much I want to get this because I'd love to be at the RSC, but also I'm planning all these things now. And if I got this job, then I wouldn't be able to do these things. And that was quite a moment for me of, gosh, isn't that a lovely place to be in? To go into an audition and think, well, this would be lovely, obviously, but also it would be disruptive. So actually, I don't mind what happens. If it goes my way, then that's wonderful. But if it doesn't, that's also totally fine.
Would I be able to fit the RSC into my schedule?
Exactly. I'm very busy lady.
Yes.
RSC, you can fit me into your schedule. But yeah, I think it's quite a liberating moment when you can stop caring quite as much. And I don't know how you can really proactively force that moment. I think it just happens sometimes. And hearing about Denise. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think it's something you can choose to do, unfortunately. No. It just has to sort of happen to you.
There's some interesting little points in each of the episodes that I've listened to. And I like the Claire Skinner you said was the first one. And she's talking about Pinter. And I would imagine that a lot of people listening to that would be, I don't know, cheered, perhaps is the wrong word, by the way she says that she struggles understanding Pinter. And you get somebody who is performing in Pinter plays and she struggles with it. I struggle with Pinter.
I struggle with Pinter.
And you said you did as well, yes. So that's something that audiences, I think, like to hear because it makes them feel less stupid when they struggle, I think.
Absolutely. It made me feel less stupid. I always think with Pinter, it's like, I was about to say it's like The Emperor's New Clothes, and that's not fair because I do understand that he was a remarkable writer and he's had a huge influence on British theatre in general. But I often find I watch Pinter and I see all these people around me just totally in awe, and I'm there in the middle being like, God, I'm obviously really stupid. Why? I don't get it. Like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't get it. So yes, I absolutely agree. When Claire said, I don't really get it either. And then to hear these lovely anecdotes of her asking Pinter questions and him being like, I don't get it. I was like, oh, Pinter doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. It's just remarkable because it touches people. And if it doesn't touch me, that's fine. But he obviously writes in a way that really touches some audience members. So fine. It's not my failing. It's no one's failing. It's just, I totally agree. I loved when she revealed that.
And Adrian Lester, it was probably a factor of you being an actor as well. You understand what actors go through because you've been in the same position, and you were talking about the speech that he does. He only does a section of it, but it's like 7 pages long, something like that, a monologue. Now that's got to be daunting for any actor, isn't it? Sure.
So daunting. Although I found it really interesting because he says, how nervous he was doing it. So Adrian's episode was a fascinating one because he talks about a play called Cost of Living by Martyna Majok, and she is this incredible Polish-American woman. And I had never heard of the play. I'd never seen it. I was aware of it because Adrian was in it at the Hampstead only a couple of years ago or something. I remember seeing it advertised, but I didn't know anything about the play. So that was a really nice conversation to have. And the opening 7 pages is this monologue that he talks about and that he does a small section from. And I was really interested to hear that he was nervous because I thought, you've played,
He doesn't come across as a nervous person at all, does he?
No. And also, I think I say at one point in the episode, but I was like, he did the Peter Brook Hamlet. Like, he's been on stage alone for a longer period of time than 7 pages. So sort of why? That's really interesting to know that this one was so nerve-wracking. And he says a lovely thing at one point about how it's that particular character. I think there was a weight of importance on the show. He loved the show. He obviously loved the stories it was telling and the way it was representing those characters. And he, I think, felt a huge amount of pressure to begin it well. And then he also says this interesting thing where he says, I had to give the audience all the information they needed from the mouth of a man who doesn't say what he really feels. Yeah. His character was very much a person who puts a brave face on and doesn't really let you know. And I thought, that's interesting. That's quite a challenge to go, I've got to set you up right for this play, but with a character who's actually not going to be open with you about his real struggles. So yes, that's a lovely anecdote. That's a great one.
Do you think it has made a difference, you being an actor, to the way you conduct the interviews?
Yeah, I think it has. I don't know whether it's made it better or worse, but I think there is a specific kind of conversation that can be two-way because I'm an actor. And I guess I absolutely want my guests to be the star of the show rather than me. But it does mean what often happens is they say something and then actually I share a similar anecdote back. Or, I share an anecdote and that springboards them into going, well, actually, yes, I've had this experience. And so I think in that way, it has made, yeah, like I say, I don't know if it's better or worse. It's a different show, I think, but it's made it a two-way conversation, which it's made it more pleasurable for me. It's been lovely to be able to actually have a proper conversation rather than it being a Q&A, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think so in that respect, I think it has helped that I'm an actor as well.
This is a product of the pandemic. It comes across as a product of the pandemic because you do refer to it in a couple of the episodes. But actors have suffered over the pandemic. It seems that you've done quite well out of it because you've been in probably...
Bless you. I feel like just as you were about to say that, you were like, oh God, I have no idea what Lucy's been through. Maybe she's had an awful year. I shouldn't say it.
Well, I know I'm talking to you on Zoom now. I feel like I know you on Zoom because you were part of the... it's got to be the world's most successful Zoom-related series. And it's probably the only one that people still look at in 5 years' time because most of them, they just talk about being in a pandemic which nobody will be able to relate to in the future. Now, this is your brother put all this together.
Exactly.
And you played his sister.
Yeah. It's been amazing and weird.
You've suddenly become world famous, haven't you?
Well, I mean, all jokes aside, I have suddenly been let in on what's the best way to put this? I have had my eyes opened to that side of being an actor, which has not been a thing in my life. And I don't know whether I've been recognised once. I was jogging in the countryside and a man shouted, "Were you in staged?" And then proceeded to be very sweet and try to shout over the sort of the cars trying to drive down this little country road in between us. But it's more things like some lovely person on Twitter made a montage of me and Georgia Tennant and Anna Lundberg the other day because we're fondly nicknamed the Chiquitas now on Twitter. And it's stuff like that that's so delightful and so lovely. And when you see it, you're like, that is so strange, but so lovely. And it's a different side of things, isn't it? And it's not something I know or I'm used to. But really the joy has been genuinely just realising how much it clicked with people. And I think for us, when we made it, it was an experiment is the best way to describe it. We would just, my brother Simon Evans, who is, in my opinion, the best theatre director we have in the country. And I'm not biased. But honestly, I think he's such a remarkable, to use a really wanky term, such a remarkable storyteller and works so wonderfully with people. I think he's a brilliant theatre director, but he was beginning to branch into film. He was going to do his first feature film last summer, and obviously COVID put an end to that. And the producer, Finn Glynn, obviously reached out to Simon very early on in lockdown and said, look, is there something we could do during this just to keep ourselves busy, keep creating, not go stagnant, but also keep our names there, maybe also get you making something at home that we can show prospective actors for this film. Because when they were trying to cast the movie, which was going to be an adaptation of the novel Hunters in the Dark, there were times they'd approach actors and these actors would sort of go, Simon sounds great, but I've never seen his work on film, really. So he sounds brilliant, but I don't know how much I want to take a leap of faith on this. And so I think Finn was sort of going, can we make something so that actually on the other side of this, there's more that we would be able to show people? And then they came up with this funny idea that was partly embedded in reality. It was partly inspired by a genuine situation of Simon's, where he was at one point asked to continue doing rehearsals over Zoom. And then they took it to David, and David took it to Michael. And suddenly this whole thing just spiraled. But even the pilot episode, right, was done entirely free. No one was paid. Everyone was just doing it in their snatched bits of time between feeding their kids or doing their online tutoring or, whatever it was. We were all just trying to give our time to make something and be like, what does this thing look like if we make it? So then the fact that we made this first episode and then the BBC were like, yeah, we love it. Suddenly it was like, oh God, okay, we've got to make the rest of this thing now. And I think for all of us, we're all making it in our homes, which is an odd thing as well.
Yeah.
Which I know a lot of these Zoom projects were, but I definitely, it's a bizarre situation. It stops. I guess the weirdest thing about this is, on the one hand, it's had such an amazing impact, and it seems to have brought so many people so much joy, which honestly is just the greatest feeling to have been in a thing that genuinely people say, oh my God, it was the most I've laughed in so long, and it's been so, you know, and you're like, that is so cool. That is such an amazing feeling. But it's all this thing where, on the one hand, I'm aware of the impact it's had, and I'm aware how much people love it. And on the other hand, it's almost as if it never happened, because I haven't actually met David and Georgia and Michael and Anna, you know? I haven't been in a room with them ever. And, you know, the editor, Dan Gage, who is phenomenally talented, I think his editing is a character in its own.
Yes.
He had an appointment he had to keep near Oxford just a couple of days ago. And so he drove via the house Simon and I are currently in, our family house, to sort of just stop in the driveway and say hello on his way. And it was the weirdest thing, because we were like, Dan Gage, like, that's your face in real life. Like, we've made this amazing thing together over the last year, and I've never actually seen your face in the flesh, you know. So that's been and because it's in our homes, coming back to that thing, it really does feel like, you know, God, as a child, Simon and I made weird morning television, you know, pretend morning television in this house.
Oh, this is just an extension of that.
Yeah, and stop motion, you know, what's it called? Like, we'd make little things with our toys and
with plasticine.
So yeah, there is an element of what you just said. This is an extension of that. There's an element of going, really? Is this being screened in America? Because it is just me and Simon messing around in our home. So yeah, it's a very odd mixture of knowing it's had an impact and feeling that in the most wonderful way, and also sort of thinking, did I just dream all of that? I'm not entirely sure that any of that even happened. It's
quite difficult to there's loads of questions that you can think of watching the first series. And the second series, you can't really ask anybody about it anymore, because it sort of answers them all in a way where you're not sure what's real and what's not anymore. It's sort of tied you in knots. So
I think Simon did an interview in the LA Times actually recently, and he said a lovely thing in that about how he used to be a magician. Well, he still is. I mean, he still does magic. Anyone who's worked with Simon will know that. I think most actors actually who like working with him, really, they just love seeing some magic in the coffee breaks. But you know, he says a thing about, because he used to be a magician, he really loves playing with an audience's idea of what is real and what isn't. He likes sort of pushing that boundary quite a lot. So yes, it definitely gets very, very meta, doesn't it?
Meta on top of meta, yeah.
Exactly.
It's understandable that the female characters have been put together by people, because the male characters are not exactly sympathetic, are they? The female characters that tend to get things done, really, in the end, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the funniest thing, I hope I don't get into trouble for saying this, but the funniest thing was that there was a moment when, with my first podcast, The Thing About That, which is actually a sort of feminist brides podcast, it's a podcast about modern women trying to plan weddings and navigate all the sort of slightly ickier traditions. I wanted some advice on some podcasty things, because that was my first venture. And David obviously has a phenomenally successful podcast of his own, and very kindly, you know, chatted away to me for a while to try and give me some help. And I remember when we were trying to arrange this phone call, there was some moment or other when he was away filming or something, and he literally said, "I'm sorry, I'm not with Georgia at the moment, so I'm not getting anything done," or you know, some joke like that. And I thought, oh right, so in real life, like, Georgia really is your sort of, you know, Georgia runs everything. Like, I think art is very much reflecting life, but no, I'm sure it's not quite as exaggerated as it is in that. But yeah, it's so funny having these incredibly adept, fabulous women and these totally just beside themselves wrecks of brilliant men. Yeah, it's just all been lovely.
But aside from the fictional lockdown, what's it been like as an actor in lockdown? Because, like I said before, a lot of people have struggled. A lot of people have found. I mean, we've heard stories of people who've been in like Game of Thrones and things like that, who've ended up working in supermarkets or delivering.
Yeah. I feel like I do feel incredibly privileged in this circumstance. Partly the tutoring. I know I mentioned this earlier, but that's always been a very fortunate side hustle as an actor for my whole career, because it's such a flexible job, and it definitely has its trying moments as well. But a lot of the time I'm working with kids I really care about, and I feel really honoured to be helping them. And I love teaching them, and I love chatting about texts with them and all this kind of stuff. So that's been wonderful, even outside of lockdown. But within lockdown, I feel incredibly lucky because I've been able to just do that, but more. And then because of staged as well, it did mean that relatively early on, there was a creative thing was in my mind.
Yeah.
Definitely I've found I am just desperate to look for ways to be proactive and create whatever that means. And even if nothing comes of it. And I have a production company called Go People, but I also run a company called Revels in Hand, where we take plays into people's homes, right? And it's sort of like a luxury events company. And with Revels in Hand, certainly, myself and my two business partners, Melanie Fulbrook and Freddie Hutchins, we certainly through lockdown one, we were going, how can we adapt? Maybe we can create, we created these sort of Zoom style scenes of plays. Then we were going, maybe we could do, when lockdown one ended, but there were still various big restrictions, we were like, we could do a songogram version of plays. Someone delivers, we would normally go to people's homes. Let's just pare it back a bit and literally have an actor can appear on your doorstep and give you a speech before they go. We called the roaming revelers, I think it was. We were like, hire yourself a roaming reveler. And I ended up going over to Dominic Cavendish's house to give him a roaming reveler experience, which is 100% the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life. On the way, my fiancé was driving me and he was like, so you're going to go and perform alone for a head theatre critic? And I was like, yes, now you say it like that, it sounds like lunacy. But yeah, so with all those things, we went to so much effort to develop the idea, create it, try and market it, try and build it up, get actors involved. And then, to be really, really honest, we got basically no bookings for any of them because actually, as much as people are missing stuff, I think they don't want a lesser version of theatre. They're just missing the theatre. And I certainly feel a bit, I know not everyone's like me, but I certainly feel a bit like that when people are talking about socially distanced theatres, I will support theatre in whatever way I can. If I can just donate to them, I absolutely will. But in terms of actually buying a ticket, I sort of think, I don't know how much I want to sit in a theatre next to 5 empty seats. I'd almost rather wait until I can go and sit in a packed theatre again. So I think we definitely found that we would go to a lot of effort to be proactive and make a thing, and then nothing would come of it. But actually, that doesn't matter. It was very good for us psychologically, I think very good for us mentally, to have a project that we were working on.
Yeah. Playing to a half-empty house must be dispiriting. I mean, it's like going back to Edinburgh Fringe. Where some people play to mostly empty houses, but the capacity half-empty, well, 2/3 empty houses, aren't they?
No, you're right. I mean, I think that's actually an important thing to say, which is we do it all the time, don't we? It's not like performing to half-empty houses is something that COVID has just made us do. It's like, people get funny. The bar just changes, doesn't it? If you're in a show that most nights sells out, if there's a night where even just 4 seats are empty, everyone's like, isn't there a joke that it's like if there's 4 empty seats in Les Mis, then it's like, oh, it's going to be shutting. Les Mis is going to be shutting. We're going to be closing. But so I think, I mean, we're used to performing to half-empty auditoriums. So maybe actually it would be totally fine.
Well, the thing is, if particularly with a comedy, it's people act as a group, and front of house tend to get people to sit next to each other more if they spread out, don't they? Which obviously they can't do at the moment. So the atmosphere is not the same, is it? Yes,
you're right. I think comedy would be the hardest, wouldn't it? I think if you're doing something a bit more dramatic or a bit more intense, you could probably get away with it more. Comedy would be tough. You just have to stop. So much easier said than done, but you just have to stop caring. And I think I only say that with such surety because with Revels in Hand, right, we have performed for, the smallest group we ever performed for was 4. We did something actually that was for Nick Curtis for The Telegraph, back when we did a big relaunch a few years ago. And we performed for him and literally 3 friends in his living room. And as a general rule, it's not 4 people, but, our events will sometimes be 10 to 20 people or something like that. And absolutely that thing happens where the minute it's a small group, even if they're in their own home and they're really relaxed, they're not going to be as boisterous as they would be if they were in a big group of people and everyone's laughing. And so I feel like maybe it's just I've been very lucky in that having that experience, it's really lowered my bar in terms of what I as an actor expect to get from my audience. You know, I'm like, I believe they're listening, so that's all right. You know, I believe they're enjoying it, because at the end they say how much they've enjoyed it. So I feel like maybe I'm slightly more, I have been in shows where the majority of the cast are getting very upset about the reaction of the audience, and I'm there thinking, I thought it was fine. Yeah,
that's always the backstage
totally
excuse, isn't it? If you're not getting the laughs,
like,
they're a listening audience.
Yeah. And I remember thinking at that point, gosh, Revels in Hand has obviously really toughened me to a slightly quiet crowd. I'm like, I'm sure they're absolutely loving it. They're just, you can't hear a smile. That's what we always get told, isn't it? You can't hear a smile.
That's the line from City of Angel, wasn't it?
Oh, is it?
No, it's not quite like that. He says smile, and he smiles. He said, louder.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly.
So you must know people who have had harder times than you. It's not just actors, is it? It's people backstage as well. So the people are around you in the theatre. What sort of experiences have other people had that you know?
I think what's slightly terrifying me is that I've seen people, I'm trying to think of the right phrase, step away from the industry, basically pursue something else that's a bit more long term. So not even just going, I'll get a job delivering for Sainsbury's. It's like people, you know, one of my best friends and my business partner in Go People and Revels in Hand, Freddie, he's doing a master's in nursing now. And I don't think he's totally stepping away. You know, he's made it very clear that he hopes he can still be part of the, you know, the company and help Mel and I. But there's definitely an element of like, you're becoming a nurse. And, you know, I've had lots of other friends and people I've spoken to where they've started to pursue things that are just a bit more long-term seeming. And I think what worries me is that I definitely come from a very privileged situation where it comes back to the tutoring again. I have a job that has enabled me to hibernate for a year. I haven't had to make that awful decision of, do I stick around or can I not afford to stick around anymore because I need to do something else? So it sounds like a weird thing to say, but I do slightly worry that I hope all the people left aren't just people like me, that we don't lose, all the steps that we've been trying to make, and it's been slow, but we're making them to try and make the industry not quite as white or as wealthy, you know, or from a certain background, or sound a certain way, or tell a certain kind of story. I do worry. That's, I think, the biggest worry from all. This is going to be our biggest hurdle on the other side, is to ensure we're going to have to work 10 times as hard to ensure that we haven't like whitewashed the industry again. So I think, that's the biggest thing we're going to have to be aware of and work towards on the other side of it. But hopefully, you know, I think the creativity is going to be vast. Everyone's going to have been sort of holed up for so long and so desperate to make things. I just hope we don't make it about COVID. I know I'm saying that as someone who's just starred in something all about COVID, but I just really hope we all are very excited to tell stories that don't have the word pandemic in them.
Yeah, I mean, there was that early in the lockdown, there was that story, which was obviously false, about Shakespeare wrote King Lear in lockdown, which obviously didn't happen. But not only was it unlikely to be true, but it was obviously meant to spur people on, but it actually made people feel inadequate. But
I actually thought the other day, I was working with one of the kids that I tutor, and we were talking about, it might have been Richard III or something like that, and we were talking about like who was on the throne at the time, and I'm going to be told off by some Shakespeare expert here because maybe it wasn't Richard III, but it was obviously a time when, you know, Elizabeth was on the throne, and it was like, obviously Elizabeth hadn't had a child yet, so there was no heir, and everyone was very worried, so that's why this story is all about there not being an heir. And I thought, we all talk about this contextual thing, and I wonder whether at the time everyone was like, you know, in Elizabethan England was like, can someone just write one bloody play that isn't about a sort of like weak government? Now, if everyone was like, I can see it in the future, everyone going, and of course at the time there was a global pandemic. So it was written about, and actually we're here being like, stop writing about COVID. So maybe back in Shakespearean time, everyone was doing the same thing. They were like, can we please write stories that are not about our heirless queen? Can we just write something?
If Shakespeare wrote any lockdown plays, then they haven't survived, fortunately. But he didn't seem to be writing about the plague, did he?
No, exactly. Good old Shakespeare.
But the things seem to be improving. There are promising signs. I've got my job planned for tomorrow morning.
Congratulations!
Thank you very much. And it's only down the road as well. I can walk to it in 10 minutes.
Brilliant.
So we seem to be coming out of it. Some parts of the world are not doing quite so well. But theatres are starting to announce that they're opening in the next few months. So what's it look like from your point of view? Have you got plans?
Oh, good question. I actually, last summer, around the time I first started thinking about this podcast, I started developing a play to produce when we came out the other side of this. And truth be told, I ended up with stage 2 and then producing this podcast, not, that having to be put on the shelf for a moment. But also I think we've all been slightly, not caught off guard, but I think most of us were being more pessimistic. So I certainly remember even around Christmas, the conversations were, there will not be a play until 2022. So in a way it's wonderful that stuff's opening up sooner, but I think certainly I can speak to my experience. I'm like, oh God, here we go. Oh gosh, I don't have anything ready. But luckily there are people with much more forethought than I who have been planning and plotting and, getting stuff ready and raring to go. So yes, I don't think we'll be short of ideas or people putting stuff on. And I'm just thrilled that it's happening sooner. I just hope we don't go backwards. We don't have a sort of opening and then closing again. Yeah,
it also depends on whether audiences are ready to sit in auditoria and sit on public transport to get there.
Yeah, like I said earlier about not necessarily wanting to be next to 5 people, I also just, for my personal levels of comfort, I don't think I'd want to go back until I've had my vaccine. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think in time for summer, outdoor stuff will be great. I think people will be really game for that. And I think as a general rule, we all feel much more comfortable if we're out in the open air. So, God, the prospect of sitting at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre or, going to the Minerva or something.
It's amazing how you get into a certain state of mind. I mean, we're watching clips from on a DVD of Live Aid from 1985 when there were 100,000 people packed into Wembley Stadium. It's absolutely terrifying just to look at it.
Because, my God. Yeah, you totally get that, don't you? Yeah. Everyone said that quite early on in lockdown 1. But I think if you're watching movies and you see people hug and you go, COVID!
Yes, I know, yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I look at these situations and just think, the 3 nights before I left London, which was about a week before lockdown 1 actually got announced, I was at the press night for Blythe Spirit and I had a cough. And I remember being like, oh, don't cough because they'll think you've got COVID. Yeah. And gosh, maybe I did. But loads of people were coughing. It was probably an absolute hotbed of coronavirus in that theatre. And then we all went to the press night party afterwards. And I do remember that was the first time I was like, ooh, don't know how comfortable I feel, because we were in that sort of venue that's underneath Trafalgar Square, basically, down in those vaults, something to do with St. Martin in the Fields or something like that. And it was very, very, very underground and very, condensation on the walls heavy and rammed. And I just remember everyone doing the classic, leaning in very close to talk to you. And I just remember going, I don't know how safe I feel in here. Yeah. And I've used the press night, the party pass from Blythe Spirit has been my bookmark all year. So every time I open my book to read, I'm like, the last theatrical event I was at.
Yeah, I got my Back to the Future, the musical badge around here somewhere. That's the last thing I saw.
Great, was it? Oh, brilliant.
In Manchester a year ago.
Oh, brilliant.
Just to finish off then, give us a couple of highlights of the podcast series that you think would really grab people.
Oh, gosh. The Mark Bonnar episode springs to mind. I enjoyed all of them, but I really, really enjoyed the chat with Mark. And he gets really passionate at one point about the fact that we need to stop thinking Shakespeare is for the intellectuals. That Shakespeare really, there's no reason why we can't make everyone feel that they can understand it and that they're so great and they shouldn't be reserved for a certain class of people. And he gets really passionate about it and talks about sort of the rhythm of life and iambic pentameter, and it's the way we all speak and it's in our bodies. And that it's a really great moment. He just really organically gets so passionate about it, and I totally agree with him. Yeah. That was quite a fabulous tingly moment. I'm trying to think of something from that I haven't mentioned yet, or from the later episodes as well. I think it's quite nice talking to so I talked to Brendan Coyle, and he talks about a play called St. Nicholas that he actually did with my brother. And we bring Simon in right at the end so that they can talk about it together. And it's clearly a play that that meant an enormous amount to both of them. And so actually, you know, in no other episode do I have two people on at the same time. I'm just talking to the actor. Whereas actually to have Brendan talk about this play and what it meant to him and how beautiful he thinks it is, and then to bring Simon in, and for them both, you can just feel the fizz. You can feel them both be so pleased to, you know, it's that thing when you're reunited with someone, it takes you right back to that play that you were doing with them. Mm. And with that play, you know, they took it to Dublin. They started it at the Donmar Warehouse, then they took it to Dublin, then they took it to Chicago together. And that's quite special. Again, there's a really palpable sense of like magic in the air because they both are reminiscing over this show that they just both adored with their whole hearts. Yeah. So that's really lovely as well. It's just the whole thing is full of people being really passionate and lovely about stuff. It's all feel good stuff. It's all good stuff. And
we get some speeches from theatre from great actors.
That's the thing at the end. I think I was slightly nervous about that. I was like, I don't want what I think it's worth just plugging quickly as well before we stop is that there are going to be accompanying YouTube videos to every episode. So if you go on my YouTube channel, you'll be able to, the show's YouTube channel, everything, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you're looking for Pod Hear Me Out, basically. But the accompanying YouTube videos are actually only about 10 minutes long. They're sort of a few of the greatest hits moments from each episode, but where you can actually see us talking. And I very consciously didn't put the speeches as part of them because actually to have a speech delivered over Zoom, it does lose something. Whereas when you're just in your earphones, you know, often when they did the speech, I sort of wouldn't look, I wouldn't look at them or I wouldn't. And it's such an intimate thing. I think it really blew my expectations out of the water. I was nervous that the speeches would feel like a lesser version of going to the theatre. And it was the polar opposite. The first episode I recorded, which was the Claire one, when Claire reads that Moonlight speech, and as we've already said, Pinter isn't even one of my favourite writers, but I got absolute goosebumps. You know, my whole body just tingled because it was just amazing. And it's been that way with every single one. When they read it, you know, it makes your heart melt. So, yeah, I hope it isn't the same as going to the theatre, but I hope it is something that theatre lovers can get a kick out of now and in the future, you know, even when we're back at the theatre. I hope people get something out of it.
That was Lucy Eaton, producer and presenter of the podcast Hear Me Out, which can be found now on all the usual podcast platforms. For more details, see www.podhearmeout.co.uk or follow Pod Hear Me Out on Twitter, Instagram and YouTube.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.